Well, now that we found out that we are not going to be back in the classroom this year, when I heard that, I really was sad about not seeing a lot of you for the rest of the school year. I really, really, really enjoyed having you guys in class. I know maybe some of you are thinking, well, you probably didn't enjoy me. No, I did. I enjoyed everyone. And it's, you think that all the teachers are, uh, you know, we, we have very mixed emotions about this because we know it's safe, but man, we're going to miss a lot of you. It was just a pleasure to have some of you in class, and I was sad when I heard it, just thinking of some of the kids that I'm going to miss seeing on a daily basis. Um, we really had totally were let out of school. We really had a really good school year, and this is a really good group of kids. And of course, if you need anything, we're still going to go on with NTI, but holler at me, and I'll do whatever I can do to help. We're going to go over these vocab words, maybe some suggestions for your posters. I know yesterday you were supposed to copy them down on a piece of paper, like we do regularly. Number one, Hernan. Sometimes it's Hernan Cortez, Hernando Cortez. He was a conquistador, which means conqueror in Spanish, who went and ended up conquering the Aztec Empire in what is now Mexico. You should have read about him in the first or second NTI weeks, about how that when he came upon the Aztecs, they treated him as a god, and then he took advantage of the situation, and in battle they had better weapons, and they'd never seen horses before, and so the mighty Aztec Empire was conquered by the Spanish, led by Hernando Cortez. Maybe for that, you could even draw a picture of the picture on the slideshow. You could draw a picture of him taking a city, soldiers marching on the Aztecs, a map of the Aztec Empire. If you want to look online, there's a lot of things you can do for it. Francisco Pizarro, another Spanish conquistador who ended up conquering the Incas in the Andes Mountains in South America, which is going to be on the western side of South America, really in the current day countries of Ecuador and Peru. And I don't know as much about Pizarro as I do Cortez about his tactics. But same idea as you could draw a conquistador conquering a group of native Incans. You could draw a picture of Pizarro itself. You could draw the area, the map of the area he conquered. There's a lot of things you could do for that. Jamestown, first English permanent settlement in the New World. The first permanent settlement was 1588, St. Augustine, and that was Spanish, but the first English settlement was 1607 in Jamestown, a colony led by John Smith. Of course, I told you before that he did not have any kind of romantic affair with Pocahontas, like the Disney version says. I mean, it was just more of a peace thing. And how Jamestown struggled for a good while because they settled in a swamp. But then they figured out how to start growing tobacco and really became a prosperous colony. The Middle Passage, the journey that the slaves had to come from Africa to the Caribbean and the Americas with absolute brutal conditions. And I think last year you probably talked a lot about this in your United States history class, but just the terrible conditions, the cramped spaces, the disease, the way they were treated, if they were, just awful conditions on the Middle Passage. Draw a picture of that if you want to. It was awful. Thomas Jefferson, writer of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the Democratic Republican Party, which was a party that really sided with smaller federal government, stronger state governments, and more of a farmers type of political party. It would be privy today more in common. Oh, geez. Political parties have changed so much throughout the years. I don't know if I really compare it to any party today. And he was the third president of the United States. Lived in Monticello. One of our founding fathers, the first Secretary of State. A lot of things you could put for Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Paine, not T-Pain the rapper, but Thomas Paine the author, who wrote a book called Common Sense about how that monarchies were outdated and that they weren't good for the people and that people should choose their own government, and basically stirred up ideas of rebelling against England and creating their own country, and his book helped lead to that push of independence. Common Sense. Draw a picture of him, draw a book of the book Common Sense, a lot of things you can do. Intolerable acts. These were the acts passed by the British after the Boston Tea Party, and included things like shutting down the Boston Harbor for trade, disallowing public meetings, a lot of different other things. There were 5 or 6 of them. One called the Quebec Act. There was a bunch of them, and just basically hitting the American colonies financially and demoralizing them, saying that you're still under English control and you're not going to do this. More of a, hey, the way that maybe a parent treats a whining child, and this is going to lead to. Sorry, that's my phone. This is going to lead to the eventual growing of militias in America that's going to lead to the American Revolution. The Boston Tea Party, the event where the Sons of Liberty threw the British tea overboard in the Boston Harbor in protest of the Tea Act. A lot of people don't know the Tea Act wasn't so much the tax that people were mad about. The Tea Act said, though, that they had to buy their tea from Great Britain when they could have bought it from the Dutch from a lot cheaper. That's why people were mad about the Tea Act. They didn't want to pay the tax, of course, but they were more mad about where they had to buy the tea from. So the Sons of Liberty, dressed up like Native Americans, went on board and threw the tea overboard, which eventually led to the Intolerable Acts. Quartering Act, which was before the Tea Act and the Intolerable Acts. Law passed by the British that allowed the British soldiers to lodge in the colonist homes. The Quartering Act, it wasn't like that soldiers all the time just knocked down on doors and said, hey, we're staying here. It was more like, can we stay in your barn? Can we stay in your property? It wasn't so much that they were a nuisance. It was so much the fact that an army or a person could stay on your property without even without you saying no. That you had to allow them to do it, which I'm sure became a pain. The Texas Revolution, 1830s. That's when Mexico had control of what is now Texas, and a group of Texans led independence movement against Mexico. The Texas Revolution included the Battle of the Alamo. A lot of Texans were actually were actually Americans that had moved down there for farming reasons, and they revolted against Texas, and eventually Texas was going to become part of the United States, and which is eventually going to lead to the Mexican War. But the Texas independence movement, most people associate that with the Alamo, remember the Alamo, and things like that, but there's a lot more to it. Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln, first Republican president, and was president during the Civil War. You probably read so much about Abraham Lincoln, tons of stuff you could put for Honest Abe. Of course, was elected in 1860, and the Civil War began in 1861, and he was actually elected in 1861. I apologize. And he South secedes, and the Civil War begins. One of the things he did was the Emancipation Proclamation, declaration made by Lincoln that freed slaves in the Union. The thing about the Emancipation Proclamation is that he made it in 1863 during the Civil War, and if you think about it, he was freeing slaves, but he couldn't really free slaves in the South because they were in rebellion. This was more of a psychological thing, telling to the South that, hey, when this war ends and the North and the Union wins, slavery is going to be eradicated. We're going to free slaves. It also encouraged slaves to escape and go to the North, knowing that they were going to be free. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book written by Harriet Beecher Stowe that spurred Northerners against slavery. A lot of Northerners had never seen a slave. They never dealt with the idea of slavery because the North was industrial. There wasn't a lot of farming. They didn't really have slaves in the North. So when they read Uncle Tom's Cabin and the injustices of slavery, they really got angry and really got behind this idea that we've got to end this evil. And so Uncle Tom's Cabin, when people started reading this book, really spurred this idea of ending slavery, which is going to lead the Civil War. Indentured servant, this is really before, in the early times, even around Jamestown, a little bit afterwards, where someone would pay for a family to come over to the New World in return of, for an X amount of years of being their servant or worker. And then after those years were up, they would get their own little piece of land and be able to make their own money. So basically a contract saying that you pay for my way, I'm going to work for you for an X amount of years, and when that's over, I'm going to be able to be on my own. The Seneca Falls Convention, which was in New York, a convention in the late 1800s that had women to rally around the idea to get the right to vote. And of course, women did not get the right to vote until 1920. So it took about 50, 60 years after the Seneca Falls Convention for women to get the right to vote. But this was a movement started in Seneca Falls for women to get the right to vote. And then the Constitution, document that sets up American government. Three articles in our Constitution. You have the Article 1 about the legislative branch, 2 executive, 3 judicial, and then talks about federalism, and then we have the amendments at the end. So tons of stuff you could put for the Constitution. If you have any questions, anything, shoot me an email. Like I said, I miss I miss you guys, and hope everybody's safe. And just let me know of anything I can do for anybody, and I will post some messages on here. Maybe not some work stuff this week. Maybe some fun stuff we can look at. See you cool cats and kittens later.